This meeting is being recorded.
Apologies for being a little late. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge of Allegiance
To the flag of the United States
United States of America,
and to the republic
for
which
which it stands,
one nation,
one God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The board provides a time for public comment at the committee meetings for residents and taxpayers to bring their thoughts on specific agenda items to the board, but it is not a time for exchange between the board, administration, and speaker. We ask that each speaker refrain from identifying specific students, staff, or community members by name. Each resident is provided up to 3 minutes to speak at a committee meeting on a topic identified on the meeting agenda. Residents and taxpayers who are interested in making public comments must complete the registration form, electronic registration form, prior to 3 p.m. on the day of the meeting. Okay, and we have 4 requests. Ready?
Yes.
Thank you.
First up, Richard Boyer, followed by Meredith Hilt.
It's 3 minutes go by quick. I'm going to speak about some policies on the agenda this evening and offer a few suggestions. They leave many lingering questions. Policy 105.1. Make the process of accessing instructional materials and curriculum information more streamlined and accessible for parents and students by creating an online portal similar to the Class Choice app that's being rolled out. This will eliminate the 10-day waiting period. The portal could also provide real-time updates on substantive changes to the curriculum or policy. The policy should allow for more than 1 request per semester, especially in the case if a student is struggling and has special educational needs. Policy 105.2. Require that requests for excusal be made within a specific time frame, like at the beginning of each semester or the school year. This way, the teachers and administrators are aware and appropriate arrangements to accommodate those students could be made to ensure that they're able to achieve the academic standards established by the district. Policy 108, include a process for gathering input from various stakeholders such as teachers and parents. A committee of these representatives could provide feedback on the textbooks being considered and ensure that they are appropriate for the needs of the district and reflect the perspectives of the community. Include a requirement for regular evaluations so that the district is continually improving its educational program and providing the best possible resources for its students. 108.1. As a new policy, when selecting materials, professional judgment needs to be defined, exercised, and held accountable. The materials must be appropriate and aligned with this district's curriculum standards and learning goals. It must take in consideration the age, maturity, and sensitivity of the students, as well as the subject matter being taught. Requests to review resource materials could also be achieved with the online portal that I referenced earlier. Policy 109. Incorporate community input into the selection process for resource materials. Establish a committee made up of parents and educators to review and recommend resource materials to the superintendent. Establish clear criteria for selecting resource material. Develop a rubric or a checklist that the committee uses to evaluate potential materials. Include specific provisions for addressing issues of diversity and inclusion in the selection of resource materials, as well as guidelines for ongoing evaluation and revision of resource materials. These policies and all others should be shaped in a collaborative and inclusive manner that takes into consideration the needs of the students, parents, educators, and the community at large. We, the parents, are the taxpayers. We foot the bill in this district, and we're well aware of the pending tax increases. Our children will be affected by how these policies are established. Let's ensure that we set the proper conditions in the present so that their future is not adversely affected. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Meredith Hilt, followed by Rebecca Jenkins.
So tonight I'd like to talk about a book by Ellen Hopkins called Identical. This book is available in the high school. It's classified as young adult realistic fiction. This is the description from Destiny. 14-year-old or 16-year-old identical twin daughters of a district court judge desperately struggle with secrets that have already torn them and their family apart. Sounds okay. But what the description doesn't tell you is that it contains explicit depictions of sexual assault, child molestation, violence, self-harm, suicidal ideations, and drug and alcohol abuse. This is an excerpt from the book. She tried to sit up, but Daddy pushed her gently down against the mattress. Stay just like that for Daddy. I want to teach you something new. He lifted her nightgown, rolled it up over her belly, and coaxed her thoroughbred thighs apart. This won't hurt, I promise. He kissed the length of her torso down to the small naked V. It was only his mouth that night. He had taught her something new, something awful and worse, something wonderful, something every girl should know the joy of, though of course she shouldn't learn it from Daddy. At 10 years old, this isn't exactly easy to separate good touch from bad touch, proper love from improper love, doting Daddy from perv. Thoroughbred thighs. I mean, like, the writing's not even that good. And who is the target audience? Children. I mean, it's disgusting, and the story's garbage. Is this the kind of thing that we're saying is good for kids? This is enriching, educational, healthy. I mean, is this what the library is for? I think we can do better. When I spoke to the librarian in the fall, she told me that if she discovered an inappropriate book, she would absolutely take it out of circulation. My very next question was, okay, what would that look like? What makes you say this is too much? Like, wow, this should go. I never got an answer. This book pops up if you search keywords or tags, but it's not flagged in any way. To warn potential readers as young as 14 who may pick it up, read the harmless summary, and decide to take it home. So I'm here tonight to ask you, what should this boundary look like? Can you clarify adult content and draft a policy to uphold the standard we all expect? I think you can. This board has been amazing. From COVID policy, masking, quarantine, sports policy, your decisions have helped to make Hempfield a better place. I am thankful for you and the administration and our gifted, wonderful teachers for yours and their commitment to our district. Thank you.
Next speaker, Rebecca Jenkins, followed by Jason Jenkins.
Hello, good evening. I wanted to thank our superintendent for clarifying what he did at our regular board meeting regarding the district's decision on the locker room access. It was evident that the truth was being manipulated to appear as something that it was clearly not. I appreciate the passion of our other community members on the importance of looking out for all of our students and their needs. And I do believe that the district has done well with this in working through the different options they have and meeting those individual needs. So thank you. I was surprised at the comment of one of the board members in stating something along the lines of it not being acceptable that our students aren't allowed to change and shower after their scheduled gym classes, insinuating that this is unhygienic and somehow is different this year than it has been in previous years. Although it may be true that our current middle schoolers are not changing in the locker rooms right now, this does not mean that they don't have a way to change if they choose to do so. You may or may not remember just a few short years ago during the COVID insanity that it was deemed unsafe for our middle schoolers to change in the locker room. Also, having 2 children in the middle school currently and having 3 previous students go through in the last 5 years, showers have never been an option. I understand that things may have been different many years ago, but I can assure you that nothing is the same as it was years ago. It is true that there are showers in the locker room and that kids were granted access to them during the few moments between the end of one class and the beginning of the next. But there is no possible way for the students to have time to shower, change, and get to their next scheduled class in those very short moments they're given, let alone the number of students in comparison to the number of showers available. I have never been great at math, but I assure you that does not add up. To the ones that say kids can just use a stall if that's what they feel comfortable with, I say this: the number of students in the locker room at one time divided by the number of stalls in said locker rooms, divided by the number of minutes they're given to change is still not working out mathematically. So again, as a parent, I thank the district for actively working on solutions and making hard decisions to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our students in a safe and effective manner. I support your efforts as you work through the process, and I understand that although there are inconveniences along the way for our students, I appreciate the consideration and dedication you have shown in finding a solution to this important issue. I will not be running to the newspaper to air my grievances. I just wanted to say a heartfelt thank you.
Next speaker, Jason Jenkins.
Good evening. I would like to thank you for all that you guys have done. Mr. Romersky, you explained what was happening at the last board meeting very well. I come to you this evening with a few things that have crossed my mind as I've sat here in many board meetings and committee meetings throughout the past couple of years. I've heard presentations that are allowing for more programs that are slated to start next year. I lost my spot. That sounds amazing for our students and a great opportunity for them. But the question is, will any of the current amazing programs that we have in place have to be terminated to allow for the new ones to come into place? If current programs and or courses will have to be removed from the course selection for next year, is this process the same to have the course removed as having the courses added? Does the board have to approve the removal of any courses? Is the board aware of any courses being removed for incoming courses currently? Within the current growth models that our district has put into place for the future teachers will need to be hired. With the cost of with the cost that our district is looking at in the future with buildings and renovations and hiring more staff, why are we considering new curriculum that will cost taxpayers in the next few years when we should be putting money back for our teachers and for our new buildings? Thank you.
Thank you. I have to consult with Mr. Barr just for a minute. It's all right.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll continue with that.
Okay. We are now ready for we flipped some things on our agenda. Career readiness plan. Who's doing that?
No, I think we'll be starting with policy tonight. And I can go ahead and run that section if that's okay.
You want to do policy first then?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
you're welcome.
All right. So with that said, we have a couple policies up to actually look at. We also have some policies for discussion a little bit later on, but to start us off, we have Mr. Graham with policy 830.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Musser. Just to give you a little bit of background, policy 830 was originally named or is currently named, I should say, breach of computerized personal information. This dates back to 2017 and earlier with Pennsylvania's data breach law. In 2022, the state legislature passed Act 151, which updated a lot of the definitions for data breaches in the Commonwealth and passed a number of requirements on any organization that stores data on behalf of the Commonwealth, which does include school districts. One of the requirements there was that we specifically adopt a data storage policy. And the goal of that policy was really to force organizations to take a look at their security and reduce the risk of future data breaches. So there really isn't a whole lot of comparison between the old policy and the new policy. The old one is pretty much thrown out in favor of the new one that defines a number of different things, types of data. The personal information section, which was in the previous version, has been updated to reflect the requirements in the 2022 law, which is going into effect on May the 1st of 2023, which is the reason we are rolling this out now. Other than that, there's not anything terribly remarkable in here besides some guidelines about safe data storage, having access controls in place, offline backups, a number of other best practices, and then some follow-up language on what happens in the event of a breach and some responsibilities on the chief information officer here in the district.
Any questions for Mr. Graham on policy 830? If there are not any questions, this is one of two policies that we are seeking to move on for first reading consideration.
I do have one question.
Mhm.
Does this policy create any situation where we would need to incur any additional costs, any additional data storage, anything from a financial standpoint?
Nothing from a financial standpoint. It does, we were basically doing pretty much everything that's defined in here already. The one piece that is a little bit different that I think we're kind of collectively in technology, at least waiting for more guidance on the state or from the state, there is a section under vendors. Pennsylvania is very far behind the times in terms of data privacy compared to a number of other states. And one of the suggestions has been to seek out more explicit definitions of data privacy with vendors. And that's really just an additional agreement when we renew contracts with different companies. So if anything, it's more paperwork. It's not an additional incurred cost. But again, we're really waiting on more guidance from the state in terms of what's going to be required in education, which at this point has not been defined.
Thank you.
Any other questions, concerns from Mr. Graham? Hearing none at this time, then we will go ahead and put that on the agenda for first reading approval. Thank you, Mr. Graham. I do know that you have another commitment you need to get to, and thank you for that presentation. Right before we get to discussion, I do have one policy and one attachment that we want to discuss briefly. If you recall, Mr. Brooks discussed this at our last policy meeting. I believe it was February 28th. These are the exact same policies that he presented to you there. There is a policy there, 625 on the procurement cards. That is a new policy that he is recommending for a straight up adoption the way that it is. And then the other one is an attachment that came out of a federal audit situation where they suggested that we included this attachment with our policy to be compliant. He does have some highlighted changes attaching to that document. Again, no revisions or changes have been made since this was discussed with the board on the 28th. I just wanted to bring it here for first reading approval.
Dr. Musser, wouldn't we just move them straight to second reading if the changes are de minimis?
That's certainly up to the board. I'm fine with that. These there has not been any changes since the 28th, so that would be fine. Mr. Keener, is that a motion?
Mr. Keener, did you hear Mr. Bauer's question?
No, I did not.
He's asking if that's a motion, what you recommended.
It can be if we need it to be, but I mean, I think the way we traditionally run this is just that if people wanted to go to first reading, we do. If we want to send it straight to second, we can. But if Mr. Mallon would prefer a motion, I'm happy to make it.
It's not necessary.
It's certainly within the board's purview to make that decision. If there aren't any questions or concerns with that direction, then we will do so. I do not need the attachment actually approved. That's more for your awareness, but I do need that policy approved. So we'll put that on the agenda for a second reading approval at our next meeting.
Well, now, Dr. Musser, if you need it now, I mean, it is on the agenda, and we could, in theory, simply approve it if that's what we have a quorum. So if you would like, we can certainly make a motion to approve it immediately and not wait until the next meeting, if that's what you would. If that
We're
would be
actually
helpful.
fine waiting. We actually haven't had this policy, so it's not something that we're in need of at this moment.
Okay.
Thank you, though, for that consideration. With that said, the rest of the policy is going to be discussion. I'll turn it over to Mr. Ramirski for discussing and some policy updates.
Thank you, Dr. Musser. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. For our board members, as you know, I've been working through various policies. What initially started off looking at resource materials and school library materials morphed into several other policies as I dug into the work behind this. So I just want to kind of talk through in order, going back as I was working through this, starting off with policy 105.1. You do have some preliminary drafts in front of you, or you can access them online as well, just from a discussion standpoint. So I can give you kind of some of that background. 105.1 talks about review of instructional materials by parent, guardians, and students. As I looked at this policy, the last time it was updated by the district was March 8th, 2016. And so one of the pieces here that I thought was important to look at from a definition standpoint, it talks about instructional materials. That to me connects to policies 108, 108.1, et cetera, as I get to them. But I thought it was important to define that what we're talking about, the term instructional materials, talks about textbooks, board approved resource materials, and materials provided by educators, should parents have or guardians or students have questions about that. I think it's important to note that while the policy is stipulated with regards to reviewing instructional materials, as a community member talked about right before at the start of the board meeting, at any point, if there is a parent or guardian that has a question and they're sitting down with the school and they want to talk through something, our staff absolutely does that. This particular policy is more about someone wanting to look at the broad scope of, all textbooks for their child's schedule, where we're going to need to really gather a lot of things together to sit down, work with them, which is why when we get those requests coming in, we need to figure out who needs to be there, being able to respond within an appropriate time frame, setting up that time, needing to make sure that what's being reviewed actually is, aren't things like assessments or state materials, et cetera, that aren't governed under this policy. Also making sure that anything that is being viewed, there is someone able to be there to talk through, answer questions, et cetera. So this is a much what I would call more invasive look at materials. Not that invasive is a bad word here. What I'm simply saying is you're trying to look at basically everything that the child may have access to in terms of their schedule, et cetera. So that's really what this policy refers to. As I looked at this, there was no additional updates from PSBA, but I did think it was important as I was looking at this to have clarity around the definition of instructional material, because I think there is a connection. We can do this a couple ways. I can keep going through all of these and then we can open it up for discussion just as coming back, or we can go one by one. It's up to you.
I have a question. I'm not on Schoology anymore. My kids have graduated, but I know in general, aren't most of these things listed on the website?
So there are times when students do have access to electronic materials, whether it's textbooks, other resource material, that they would access codes through Schoology or what the teacher is issuing. There are times when, yes, teachers are have folders of units of study of the work that students are doing that, yes, students and parents can also access. There are times where there may be a hardback textbook that maybe a parent hasn't seen, or the student has opted not to take home that the parent wants to see. Because maybe there's a class set and the students have access online. Sometimes parents want to be able to see the whole thing and not have to go through all the electronic versions. So we do have those textbooks. In some cases, some classes, we do have just like one class set depending on the course.
Right.
So it kind of really varies depending on the situation. But yeah, there are a lot of materials accessible online via Schoology that students and parents already have access to.
So the point of this is, I would use the word very thorough.
Yes.
Thorough access for anyone who has this specific concerns.
Correct.
But in general, the information is not everything, but in general, a lot of that information is on the website or in Schoology.
Right. So when you look at things like curriculum on our public website under the academics tab, you will find if you go to whether it's elementary or secondary, like I'm just going to click on grade 5. It's right here. What you'll see is everything, text wise, what will be taught. You have math, you have reading, writing, spelling, listening, vocabulary, STEM, art, music, et cetera. It goes on and on. Through that, we also have opportunities for parents to download a PDF of that overview from a
And
curricular
that's just the
standpoint.
listing of the topics, of the
Correct.
courses, but
Correct.
not the specific materials.
Right. And
Okay.
so that's where if you want to go into that deeper, more thorough look, we have that availability to set that up. At our elementary level, particularly students, we have consumable books, so they are taking things home. But if
Right.
parents want to see that on the front end, that's fine. Our school staff absolutely sit and work with staff. I mean, Dr. Musser, Dr. Dandridge, anything else?
And I'm not implying that
Yep.
we hide anything, and I
Yeah.
don't think we do, but
Nope.
sometimes things are available and
Correct.
we as parents don't always realize what is actually available.
Correct.
Okay, that was all. Thank you for that clarification.
I have a couple questions about starting with policy 105.1.
Yeah.
When you go to the guidelines section and then there's numbers 1 through 6.
Yep.
I have a question about number 1. Help me understand the reason for no more than one request per semester may be made by a parent or guardian or student for each enrolled child. Is there a purpose behind that? Is that standard language in policy, across the county? I'm not sure I understand the one request piece, so please help me understand
Yeah,
that.
as I was looking back, that is basically the template that's provided by PSBA. Can we change that? Absolutely. That certainly can be changed.
Are you concerned about a huge influx of requests that would cripple the district with personnel?
I'm not aware that this is actually utilized regularly at this point, because we do work with families. So to me, it is, if a parent has a question, they want to sit down and talk about something, we absolutely do that. I think if we're needing to collect a lot of material based on a request, to do that regularly is going to be time consuming of staff for sure. But on those situations where a parent says, I have a question about this, can we sit down and look at it? Absolutely. There's no issue with that.
I guess I know this is the first time we're looking at this and talking about it, but I would
Be more
suggest
clear.
considering that maybe not be so rigid and defined, especially since we're not necessarily following that practice anyway. Obviously, if there's a concern with, 50 requests from one parent for one student, then we would have to put some guidelines in place and we could obviously do that. And then number 6, I just wanted to understand.
Mr.
Yeah.
Justin, Mr. Grant, Keener, did you have a question about this?
Not yet. No, I have
Okay,
a comment with regard to Mr. Walgamuth, the point that Mr. Walgamuth is making.
Do
okay.
you want to make your point? Because I was going to move on. to
No,
number
I'll wait till you're done. I'm not.
Okay.
Okay,
I was just going to also ask for clarification on the no parent or student shall be permitted to remove the material provided for review or photocopy the contents of such file. They can take notes according to the policy, but I guess my question is this material that's typically available to the students and the parents anyway? What's the purpose of that? Am I missing something?
I think some of that would be if they're looking at material that the student hasn't accessed yet, it hasn't come up in the course. Let's say you're at the beginning of the semester and you're looking at all the material. So we wouldn't want that material going home if it hasn't already been provided to the student, so that they're in a sense working ahead or
Yeah.
copyright potential.
And that could also include potentially material on tests and things like that as well. So I'm sure there's a security piece there.
Yeah, the photocopying piece is definitely a copyright piece, for sure.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
And then,
Right.
and then with regard to Mr. Walgamuth's one request per semester, it does seem a bit stringent, but there probably should be guardrails in place to prevent. Not that I think people would do this often, but I could see a scenario where someone tries to weaponize this policy, and then we would want something in it to prevent that weaponization. Whether it's one request per semester or something else, but I think not having anything could potentially open the district to
I think there's
requests that are not motivated by all the best intentions.
there's ways to kind of define the review, whether it's a question about something that's coming up versus a more thorough, in-depth look at everything, so I think we can kind of clear that up in terms of kind of a purpose piece.
Yeah, I completely respect and understand that. I think it just from a perception standpoint, it looks like there's limitations there. And, I think it just feels like we're posturing up a little bit, for lack of a better way of describing it. And if it's not necessary to have that in there, typically it comes across a little softer. The other thing I would just suggest that we continue to look at ways that we can, on the front end, eliminate some of the reasons why there may be multiple requests. I think, and that ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So that if we can involve, the right people, representatives from different groups at the table, and we have curriculum that isn't going to be challenged, this line item becomes a moot point for the most part. And I think that's a better play than trying to stop it on the back end, where we would have 50 challenges because we didn't do a good job maybe of vetting the material up front. And again, I'm not suggesting we're not doing that. I'm just suggesting let's put some emphasis on the front end of this and not so much on the back end.
When I read this, my thought was high school students with multiple courses, multiple teachers. But I also thought, don't we usually give parents a heads up in the elementary, what they're going to be studying, generally speaking?
Yep.
And then in the high school, middle school and high school, they get a syllabus,
That's great.
which has text, resource material, films, etc. That they plan on having that used. And granted, sometimes there may be in the past an impromptu choice of something because they ran across something, say a newspaper article or a current magazine article. But in general, they can have access to that at the beginning of each marking period or each semester.
Generally,
whatever.
I think about my time in the classroom, when I was getting ready for a new unit coming up, or sometimes it was a weekly or a monthly newsletter. Here's what we've covered. Here's what's coming up. You kind of give that notice. I know our teachers at various levels do that already. Sometimes it's electronically through Schoology. We're accessing a new file or a new unit. Here it is. And so really, it really depends. I mean, Dr. Danderson.
Yeah, it's all thoroughly discussed at parent nights, back to school nights, conferences.
Correct.
Conversations when they're engaged.
Yeah.
Including at the high school, middle school and high school. I know Miss Dicely told me, now I can't remember when they get their syllabuses in their classes.
At the start of the course.
So for the year.
Yeah, for that entire course, whether it's a semester based or a year.
For the entire year. Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
And I did just randomly check a different district that I didn't look at from a policy standpoint for this one, and they have the exact same one per semester. That is that standard, I believe, boilerplate from PFBA. But that's part of the discussion here because these are all connected in some way. Just getting some of that feedback. If there's any other questions, happy to answer those on this one, and then I'll move on.
Well, it seems like if there were any questions, the superintendent can give permission for more information as needed, something like that.
Yep. Okay. All right. 105.2 then has to do with after material.
We're gonna take that number one off. We're gonna eliminate.
I'm gonna do some revisions and then we'll be bringing these back for like formal first reads, but I wanted to just get some feedback through the discussion because there's been a lot of work with these trying to kind of merge them where it's possible because they're all connected and you'll start to see that at the end of each policy where it has the legal connections. And if you look at what I provided you'll see some things added in red, and I'm connecting things back to, like this one will be to textbook adoption, to resource materials, making sure that we have the proper connections to the policies is important. Jeremy, if you can just scroll to the bottom, please. Just so you can see that legal section right there. So you'll see what it's referring to or where that content in a sense could come from, and you'll see those codes denoted, like number 7 has a 3 and a 4. So that connects to policy 102 and 217. So, but Jeremy has the next policy up, which is 105.2. So after a parent would review information, if they determine that they want to consider an exemption from instruction, parents can certainly have a right to have their child excused from specific instruction that conflicts with their religious beliefs. As we dug into this, some questions that were asked of me from various members of our community, for example, let's say hypothetically, a parent, we adopt a social studies program and the parent doesn't like the program. Can they opt their child out of that, the entire program? And so we went through and the homework here and kind of digging into this. And what really specifically comes out is that specific instruction is actually not defined in school code or PA school code at all. There are certain areas of instruction that are identified in statute and regulations that a parent can have that request for exemption due to religious beliefs. They are for instruction on HIV/AIDS, religious literature, dating violence, and the dissection of animals and animal parts. Now, understanding that, we know that there are other things that a parent may have religious objections to. And so from a policy standpoint, we can excuse a student from specifically identified instruction subject to the following conditions. There was a lot of work done on this one, and there was actually a court case, Africa versus Commonwealth of PA, back in 1981 that was ruled on the Third Circuit that definitely has a lot of implications here for all school districts. But it has to be specifically identified instruction. It cannot be an entire program unless it's one of those four based on statute and regulations. It would have to be clearly connected to a religious belief and an exemption. And then during that time of instruction, the student, the bearer of responsibility is on the student to make sure that they seek to be excused. So that the student and parent have a conversation with the teacher. When we're getting there, the student then would get that excused. And the student would absolutely be excused. And then they would need we would look at what would be something comparable that student could do. But it is important to note that while a parent or student may request suggested replacement educational activities, the only permissible educational activity shall be in the nature of the replacement instruction. So what that means is if a parent says we have a religious belief against this, I don't want my child, getting instruction on this, we need to find something around kind of similar content that won't conflict with the belief. And it's not that the child then gets to do something completely different during that time. The other part of this, where you'll see, Jeremy, if you can go at number 1, again, trying to get into that specifically piece, is the fact that the request needs to be made in writing, again, specifying in detail the instruction with the students to be excused, and then the religious belief from which the instruction conflicts. There has to be specificity around that explanation based on all the legal work and interpretations, particularly not only in current code, but also from the court case of Africa versus Commonwealth of PA.
I have a clarification.
Sure.
Because we have an opt-out program, correct, for curriculum,
Right, but only for religious.
but only for religious.
Correct.
So I guess I'm confused. I thought if there was a book or a unit or something, the way I understood that policy or that
Yep.
process was this book, I don't think is going to be a good book for my kid. Please find another book, but you're saying it has to be defined with.
So we have in place as a district, in that particular piece in classes, if we have a book that we're saying this is what we want students to be
Mhm.
reading, we do have alternative text. If there is a conflict for religious belief and we work with the family, or there's, another major issue that we're trying to work through, we have alternative text that are comparable to that book that student would then read. When we have those books that we ask you to approve, we always provide comparable books that can be used in its place. With regards to this specifically, this policy is pertaining to, I don't want my child to receive instruction in this particular topic at all,
Okay,
due to a religious belief.
okay.
Yep.
So there's still options out there.
We
for
do have
parents.
options.
Okay.
We always, anytime we bring you
Mhm.
books, particularly
Right.
novels, trade books, et cetera, we always provide alternatives that we are also looking at in that
Okay.
situation.
Thank
Yep,
you
two
for
different
that
things.
clarification.
Yep.
Just a point of clarity, under specific instruction, the additional piece
Yes.
that has items 1 through 4, the way that's written, it would appear that only those 4 items would qualify. Is that accurate? Or should it state something such as parents can request an exemption due to religious beliefs such as these items or not limited to? Because unless those 4 are limiting, the way this reads, it appears that if it does not fall under one of those 4 categories, it does not fall under religious beliefs. And I could see there's other things that might qualify.
This, from a wording standpoint, was just to identify there are, because it's not defined in code, this is what we were able to find and get confirmed legally, that these are specific things in federal statute or regulations. So I think to that point, Mr. Walken, with that would be a piece we can certainly go back and
Yeah.
a little
if
more
we could
clarity around.
Use those more as
Yeah.
examples maybe, but not limited to language such like that would be helpful. I think to keep it tied back into religious beliefs, but not limiting to those four.
Mhm.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. Any other questions on this one? Again, you have these are not up for a first read. So if you do have other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. So moving then from looking at the material, wanting to look at the material, actually looking at it, potentially being, opted out for a religious purpose. We then get to the process starting with textbooks. When we have a textbook that we are looking at reviewing, he's leaving. I was hoping he was going to hear this. Hopefully someone can fill him in. If not, I can follow up. We have a curriculum audit revision process and a cycle that we utilize for all subject areas. And part of that process that we work through is we then go, if we have a textbook in a particular subject area, we go back and we look at that textbook to determine, is this textbook still appropriate, not appropriate for the course in which we're teaching? Has it been updated based on new content? Is it outdated or not? And so we have a team of educators who work on this across the department. This is not just one person. They kind of scour, they do their research to see what textbooks are out there. They get samples in, they review them. We provide then a time when we come to the board to talk about textbook adoption. We have an entire process that is followed. Everything is documented in terms of all the textbooks that are reviewed and they're evaluated. And based on the evaluation of all the textbooks, then the team makes a recommendation to the board. Anytime a textbook is looked to be adopted, we have a 30-day period. After we make that recommendation for a textbook, it sits for 30 days. We are open, people can come and look at it. Everything is always done in a public setting from a textbook discussion and adoption standpoint. And then after the 30 days, it comes back to the board for review. And then that curriculum audit revision process continues. So after, a couple of years in, we are looking at it. Is it still working? Is it not working? Is it outdated? And then we repeat that cycle all over again. There are times that the textbooks stay because it's determined, yes, the book still has validity and it's still a good one. There are times when we come back and say, no, it's time for a new one. Or what we're finding more regularly now, if you recall several years ago, actually many years ago now, we were starting to have conversation around having less copies of the physical textbook and getting more ebook access from a textbook standpoint. Well, what we're finding now is companies are saying, oh, that textbook's now outdated. Your 6-year license that you purchased is now, we're no longer doing that or using that. So you kind of have to start all over again. And so we work through that whole process again to determine, is this textbook appropriate? So what I did is just, as I went through this policy, there's really not a lot to update here other than simply say that the board expects the district's curriculum audit revision cycle to be implemented on a yearly basis, because each year there's a different phase of that cycle depending on the subject area. Not every subject area is in the same cycle year, if you will, because we would never be able to get all that work done. So we have teams in each department working through that. And then I do have here, the process includes reviewing textbooks, just making sure that that's very clear because it wasn't. Textbooks then shall be defined as board approved books, because we do that. That was added in. And then at the bottom, a list of all approved textbooks used in the district shall be maintained. And then we provide that list if that's requested. So I just wanted to kind of explain that process a little bit, knowing that that question was asked. I think he's coming back in. He just missed all of it. I can certainly follow up on the textbook piece. But there, again, from a policy standpoint, this covers the broader piece, but we do have a full process, documentation, whole 9 yards.
I don't have a lot of comments on this policy, but the one comment I do have, and I've noticed this in a couple of policies, so just help me understand, in the beginning, we say under authority, the board shall by affirmative vote of a majority of the full board adopt all the textbooks, blah, blah, blah. And you drop down under delegation of responsibilities, and this is noted in multiple places where it requires 2/3 vote of the board. Is there a rationale behind a 2/3 vote of the board rather than a majority that's consistent throughout?
There is, in terms of code. So you see there that that's connected back to some legal statutes, numbers 1, 3, and 4. Section 24 of the Public School Code, or Chapter 24 of the Public School Code, Section 508, Section 803, and the district's policy, our own policy of number 6. So that's where that language comes into play. Once something gets in by the board, it takes the majority of a board. And then if there needs to be a change or getting rid of something, depending on how the policies are worded, there are times when it takes, in a sense, 2/3 supermajority of the board to do that.
So it's required to have the 2/3 under the law.
In
Of
this
school
particular
code.
piece, yes.
Okay, that's the clarity I needed.
Yeah.
And as a practical matter, it's just one more vote. It takes you from 5 to 6 to hit that threshold. The other point, under authority, and this is just more of a drafting thing, I think that there's some extra language there. It's establish a planned cycle of textbook should probably be deleted, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Keener. That should have been connected to the review and replacement.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Yep. Thank you for catching that.
I'm once again confused. It says resource material shall be defined as board-approved materials under definitions to supplement the district's curriculum, content, et cetera.
Yep, you're in a different policy, Mrs. Johnson. We're in the textbook one. I think you went one page lower.
Oh, a two page. Well, there's a
We're getting there
contradiction
next.
there. Okay.
We're getting there
All
next.
right.
Yep. Yep. So, and I think I know where you're going there. I want to that point.
Mhm.
So the definition of textbook or the board approved books uses basic information sources of plan and instruction, and we'll get to that and the definition on the next one. I'll make that connection for you.
And I just, if I may, to go back to Mr. Walkermove's point, I think that the 2/3, as I'm looking at this again, basically it requires a majority of the board to adopt a textbook that the superintendent recommends. If the superintendent doesn't recommend something, then it requires 2/3. That's where the difference between the majority and the super majority kick in. It's not necessarily to change something. It's to say, board wants to go a different direction from the administration. The school code requires a supermajority to do that, I believe.
Yeah, and I can go back and double check that, Mr. Keener, with regards to code and then our own policy 006. Because 006 defines majority vote. I don't.
Yeah, in other words, if you look under the
quite
first
long, so
paragraph,
I'll go
the
back.
delegation of responsibility.
It's quite long on that 006 policy, so I'll go back and check that.
Yeah, and I'm just going with what's here. I did not cross-reference it to the footnotes, so.
Yep. Okay. Sounds good.
I also probably have, make sure I'm looking at this correctly because of a bunch of material here. I'm also suggesting maybe, and I need to bear with me here 1 second. I don't want to move off that policy for a split second. Under, it's different than what I have. I'll come back to it.
Okay.
I might have a suggestion. Oh, I found it. It's under the last page of policy 108 that we've been referring to, and I think I have this correct. Under selection procedure for other materials provided by educators.
Yeah, you're right.
Shall adhere to the following. And this suggestion is going to be directly related to policy 109 as well. And we have 4 items listed there currently. One of the suggestions I have is that part of this is going to tie back into policy 109. And so I'm going to have some suggestions for policy 109. They're probably going to be too many for this meeting, but I believe we're going to need to add another item at least to policy 108. And it's going to refer back and connect in with policy 109. So I don't want to take us down a rabbit trail right now, but I'm just suggesting I'm not quite done with that policy yet.
Right, you're.
Mr. Bomerski, I'm sorry, Mr. Walker.
108.1.
Right, this one.
I'm not seeing that on 108. Are
Oh, you
we?
didn't even get there yet?
No.
We're not there yet.
I'm ahead of you.
So we're on.
Oh, okay.
Just textbooks. So I'm just, so
I jumped ahead.
So there was
My
a
apologies.
method to the order.
Yes,
as we're
I
working
see
through
that. I see I jumped ahead.
So no,
Thank
it's
you.
fine. It's fine.
I'll hold that thought.
I want it because it is important because as we started digging into this, you see the connection to all of these policies. Starting off, again, I'm just going to retrack here real quick. You know, parent wants to review material, a parent has a concern or religious objection. Well, then how are some of these things coming into play? So we're starting off with textbooks. So that was a more basic policy. The next one that I'm going to get to is a new policy that I'm, as I was looking at this, I think it should come after 108 as 108.1, because after textbooks, the board does approve resource materials beyond a textbook. And then there are times when educators bring in things to the classroom that aren't board approved. And so 108.1 goes one step down from a textbook to then those additional resources that the board would provide and or what staff would be bringing into a classroom. So given that this is a new policy, we've been round and round and all over this from where should it be and whatnot, but as we were working through it, we settled on the fact that it really should come after the textbooks. And partly because we do bring to the board supplemental material, resource material that we would like to see and board approved. So in the next policy, this is completely new, which is why you do not see any strikeouts or highlights, et cetera. And I will say right out of the gate, I think with some changes, I feel comfortable bringing back 105.1, 105.2, and the textbook 108 for next meeting as a first read. The next two, depending on discussion, may warrant more work before we move further. So moving into now the resource material and other material provided by educators, 108.1. We know that from a purpose standpoint, there are other things that are essential to student learning experiences. So it's important to outline the expectations for these materials in this policy. And at the same time, we know and have here that the board recognizes that educators do bring things into the classroom to enhance student learning experiences. And while they're not board approved and are maybe not part of the district's plan review and replacement cycle, it is important to outline expectations for that material. And so we worked through defining resource material. So we have a textbook, we went through that. So now resource material, whether it's digital or print, will be defined as board approved materials to supplement the district's curriculum or content and to be available for teacher use during planned instruction. So this is going to supplement a textbook. It's going to supplement, things, at that higher level that were approved. And then other material provided by educators, whether it's digital or print, would be non-board approved material brought into the classroom by the educator to enhance the student learning experience. As a broader starting point, just from a definition, I just want to kind of basically think of it as three levels: textbook, resource material, and then other stuff that's brought in by the educator. Okay. So in terms of the delegation of responsibility for the resource material, we obviously will bring it to the board and follow our same process that we would do, reviewing material, vetting it, et cetera. And then that's where I'll go back and double check because we have here no change except 2/3 vote of the board. I will confirm that. And we'll check on that. Obviously, we need to have administrative regulations for reviewing, evaluating, and selecting, which we will then go back and create based on our textbook material to have the same type of process where it is documented, evaluated, and we can go back to that and the board can see that as well. We would absolutely keep a list of all the approved material so that's available should a request be made. We would also ask that educators maintain documentation within their lesson plans of materials that they utilize during their instructional lessons, and all material utilized obviously must be connected back to the approved curriculum and adhere to board policies as well as current laws and regulations. So if a question came up, was this used, or a parent has a concern, we'd be able to say, okay, we'd be able to go back to the lesson plan to say, was this actually used? And the teacher would have that. I know I see several staff members. I do see some teachers. They're nodding their head because they do this every day as they're doing their lesson plans. So that's nothing that would be new. But it is just now officially would be documented that that would be the expectation.
Just curious, what do you mean by other material provided by educators? I'll just use an example. For a math teacher, I was teaching a lesson on factoring, and there's materials that were provided, by the book and which would be the other resource material, but the kids just don't get it. So I make up a worksheet. But that's, and I do it that evening because I taught the lesson. They just don't get it. They need more practice.
Right.
They
So,
could,
in your lesson plan, you'd be noting, during this time, the students are completing a factoring worksheet, and you would have that as, whatever the name of it is or whatever. Because if you weren't there for a day and you created it and sent it in for a substitute, they would need to know what you're specifically referring to.
I understand, but that's not really board approved material.
Correct. And that's okay. That would be the other material provided by educator. Yeah. So that's kind of that distinction.
Just actually making sure for the actually for the staff.
Yep. Nope. That's good. Yeah. So we have that board approved material, and then those things that the teachers find, whether it's an article, whether it's creating something on their own, whether it's they've collaborated together to create a project, and they have all the materials for that they've compiled together. They're going to have that documentation and then be able to refer back to that. That's what that would mean.
This is where I had some questions. This is kind of a fuzzy area because you have circumstances like what you just mentioned. I've been in circumstances where, oh my gosh, we need this book or this movie or whatever. But there are times that materials are thought of ahead of time that a teacher wants to use in a classroom. But it seems like, and this is where it's fuzzy because it's like, we trust our teachers. We know they're trained and professionals. Should there be some kind of check with some of the materials that are brought in? Like, and I'm referring back to a review that I was part of. That's the only time since I've been on the board that there's been a review, that an official review that I know of. My understanding was that the team that teacher was working with was unaware of what was being used. But there were three, pretty big pieces of, so it seems like if you're bringing in books or specific articles, that you've already included and planned in, that somehow your team or the people, your peers of that subject or that grade, whatever team you happen to be on, that it would behoove them. It would be a good idea, hey guys, what do you think? This is what I want to use.
So I will get to that.
Okay. All right, good. Good.
No, and that's great conversation, kind of great lead in, because you, again, trying to.
I guess I would have a comment to that though. We don't expect every teacher to teach everything exactly the same. Our teachers are not robots. They have an element of academic freedom to, within the approved curriculum, deliver the material in the way that they think is best. If one faculty member wants to supplement the curriculum by bringing in an essay about a particular topic, and some other faculty member wants to supplement the lesson by bringing in a newspaper article or a court case or something like that, that's okay, as long as the general requirements of this proposed policy are met, and that is that the supplemental material connect back to the lesson. So I guess, Mrs. Johnson, I don't know that I would expect a faculty member to clear their supplemental materials with their colleagues, as long as they're complying with the requirements of this policy. Perhaps I misunderstood your concern.
As a teacher, having taught in a variety of situations, I want to know that what I'm teaching does meet all of those requirements. In no way by asking teachers to do that, am I suggesting that that is clipping their freedom, their creativity, their wings as a teacher? I know I have 5 kids that have gone through school, 3rd grade teachers. I could tell you what was about each one of those because they taught totally differently. So that's not what I'm suggesting, that I want them to be robots. I don't think any parent wants that at all, or any stakeholder. What I am saying is that, I'll just say it, in this climate, and because parents are more concerned, some school board members are concerned about the concern. I just think it's, professionals confer with each other often. I've been in a professional situation too. I confer with my colleagues to see, hey, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? That keeps us from, and I have also already seen examples of books that have been selected that did not support the educational goal for that particular course or that particular book that was being read. And that was supposed to be, the book that was chosen was supposed to support that, and then in fact did not. So how do we balance that out? That's what I'm asking.
From a process standpoint of a policy, as I'm working through this, trying to share the information here. So I've gone through the definition and the delegation of responsibility section. Where I'm getting to next are the guidelines and the selection procedures. And I think the difficulty in this policy, and is you need to kind of keep in the forefront of your thinking textbooks, resource materials, and other materials by educators. And the policy, this one just focuses on the bottom 2, the resource materials and other. And so as we look at this, the way I did the policy is I start off with the resource materials, and then I follow it up with the other material in each section. So on the delegation of responsibility, it talks about needing to maintain that, documentation, et cetera. For the other material by educators that is not board approved, again, it's in their lesson plans, same as above, and I'll get to the selection. But the other part that has come up, and I think it's important to address, are classroom libraries. And what we would be recommending is, it is impossible for educators. I mean, I shouldn't say that. It is possible, but it will take a lot of time. And I don't know if that's where our time should be spent with our educators to inventory every book that's in their classroom library. However, they need to be the expectation is they need to have full knowledge of the books that they are providing access to their students. And they need to make sure that those books are appropriate grade level, content, curriculum, laws, et cetera. And
You're still going.
You're
still going. I don't.
So I wanted to just outline that while we're not requiring a list, they do need to have full knowledge of what they're providing to students and be able to answer to that.
You segued right into my point under, while educators are not required to maintain a list of classroom library books, and I agree with you, Mr. Keener, there's not a real way that you can practically vet everything that a teacher would bring into the classroom. So I support creating a policy that aligns with the guidelines that we would want in place for those materials. So I'm going to suggest a slight change to that. And it starts with the comma. They are expected to have full knowledge of the books. It's fine if they have full knowledge of the books, which is, I would expect that they would, being that they're in the classroom, they're being used to be as part of their lesson. But that we change that language slightly to they are responsible for the books they are making accessible to students. And that change puts the responsibility on the teachers, which will be outlined a little later in the rest of this policy. And that ownership belongs with them for the libraries that they have there. So having the knowledge is one thing, and being responsible for the content that you have to make sure that it's age appropriate and it matches board policy is the way that you tackle your concern, Mrs. Johnson.
I do realize this is a really murky, fuzzy area. How do you do this and still honor our teachers and their creativity, their desire to teach, in their care for our students as well.
That's why you put the responsibility where it is. It allows the flexibility and freedom, but there's also a responsibility for the teacher bringing that book into the classroom to make sure that it aligns with the guidelines and the policies and the expectations of the district.
So I have a question on that. In our informational meeting with the librarians, it was agreed that it's not possible for them to read every single book that comes in. But the teachers being responsible for their personal library or their classroom library, not their personal. But they're responsible for that content. Does that mean they're reading every book that they bring in?
We didn't get to that policy yet.
I mean, I guess I'd echo Mr. Walkamuth's point, and I agree with him that if we make the faculty accountable for the materials that they provide access to, that doesn't mean, I think we just need to make clear what the word accountable means. It doesn't mean that the information that they provide has to be free of any controversy. It doesn't mean that every member of the Hempfield community would find the book to be acceptable. It simply means the material complies with the policies set forth by the board, that it be age appropriate, and that there be a nexus between the material and the approved curriculum. So, I mean, and I guess that connects to Mr. Bard's question that certainly they should be familiar with what they're putting in there. But I don't know that that means that they have to read every word of every book, but simply be able to say that this book complies with board policy.
And
yes,
that
there
goes
might
back
be
to,
a sentence in the book that some parent finds objectionable, okay? But the book taken as a whole, which is the standard that we use when evaluating these things, taken as a whole, the work complies with the policy. So I think that actually this all works together quite nicely.
correct. And that's why I'm concerned about the word full knowledge, because full knowledge indicates that they know every aspect of every book that's in their library. And it does not add the accountability portion. So I just suggest we make some changes to that language. That's all.
The intention on the full knowledge piece was that they're aware of the books themselves. There are times, I mean, I speak for myself. I mean, there are times when people, because we want kids to have access to a variety of books, we will get bags and boxes of books that individuals are donating, or someone found at a garage sale or a library sale. And we have this huge box, and where I think some of the concern is you need to have the awareness if you're taking that book out of what that book is and you're putting it on the shelf. And we're not just in a situation where I have this whole bag and here we go. So that's from the full knowledge standpoint of, I know what this book is. To, Mr. Keener's point in yours, Mr. Walker, I'm not saying you have to read the entire, but you have to know what that book is before you put it out there in the library. And generally there are a lot of popular books that teachers are familiar, we hear with kids and that they're reading, but we do have those situations where time and time again, especially with newer teachers or some who are like, I'm really short, and you just get the generosity of people say, here you go, here's a whole bunch of books. That's where some of that concern comes in.
Well, I think it comes back to the accountability. No one should be concerned about the accountability around it if the materials are age appropriate and follow the policy. So I'd like to see something more around the accountability. I surely would not be concerned about accountability unless I was not necessarily following the policy. And if I'm uncertain about a book, a box of books or a truckload of books that shows up, I'm surely not going to add them to my library until I've had a chance to review them.
Right.
I may not have a full knowledge of them. I'm going to make sure I understand that they're age appropriate and are appropriate to be on my shelf before I surely would put them there.
Yep, good points. So as we get into the selection material, then the first piece that I want to just address are just those resource materials that the board approves. We'll get to the other one with educators in a minute. But just,
I just want to make sure I'm on the right page.
yep. So we are, there are no page numbers. So under, it would be page 2.
101.
Of
801.
108.1 down the bottom where it says guidelines,
Okay, got it.
selection for resource materials shall be developed. Again, this is board approved resource materials. So obviously, we have teams that work on selecting, reviewing, and providing those recommendations to me or a designee as assistant superintendent to bring to the full board. Make sure from a budgetary allotment standpoint that yes, we have the money and we're distributing that equally and where it needs to be spent. It should support and enrich plan instruction. We have to make sure we're evaluating the effectiveness of it. Part of the selection process, again, similar as textbooks, you're consulting and evaluating a variety of sources, not just jumping right at the first thing that we see that we think we like. And obviously all materials suited for reading levels and maturation levels of the students to be served. And to be clear, these materials do come before the board for approval.
I'm going to suggest that as we move into the next policy, this is a place where we add a number 7. And then also under that selection of procedures, again, that I shared earlier, we add a number 5. And that's going to be referencing the age appropriate and any other materials or parts of policy 109. So I would suggest that we tie policy 109 into this policy in some sort of way around adding an age appropriate materials and some other language, which I can get into later.
Okay.
As a number 7 and a number 5 under each of those. And then I'm going to jump to challenge materials. I might as well just share this while I have the mic. Also under challenge materials, the review of challenge materials shall be handled objectively. That's where I believe you can just stop with that one. I crossed off weighing the value of the materials as a whole and not on passages or segments considered out of context. And the reason I crossed that out is because there may be passages or segments in there that taken out of context are still not appropriate. And I think that's a good place just to stop, that the materials will be reviewed and handled objectively, period. So those are my suggestions for this policy, and I'll give up the mic.
Okay. So I'm going to jump to the selection of materials for the other materials provided by educators. Again, not board approved. These are things that then educators come across, create. I want to bring this into the classroom. Obviously, they must directly relate, support, and enrich the planned course of instruction. Consultation and evaluation of a variety of sources should take place before they're selected for educators to be using. Now, situation that Mr. Donato's.
Mr. Romersky, which policy are we on right now? 1081?
108.1. This would be page 3 at the top.
Okay. Oh, right there. Okay, thank you.
Yep. In a situation, as Mr. Donato referenced, you're creating a math, prime factorization, some word problems. That's pretty standard with regards to numbers. So you're not necessarily going to be consulting because that's not something you're finding somewhere else. You're actually creating that. So I guess that brings up a question that it's kind of wrestling in my mind right now. Like, if it's being self-created, it should obviously still connect back to curriculum, et cetera.
Yeah.
So that would be a piece we could certainly look at. Obviously, back to ensure materials are suited to the reading level, maturation levels of the students to be served, and this does include classroom library materials. Technology was a piece that, as we looked at, we want to make sure that if someone finds something from a technology standpoint with our systems and firewalls and different apps, et cetera, we don't just open it up to all students. It is vetted at another level through our technology team, working with Mr. Paul as our director of instructional technology, our instructional technology coaches. They're all looking at that, they're working at it, and then they're really evaluating to determine, is it something that really should be used, and will it be supported with all of our technology infrastructure? The last thing we want is someone saying, hey, I want to use this app, and it hasn't even been vetted or reviewed from a technology standpoint. All of a sudden, we're now opening up all kinds of Pandora's boxes with content, et cetera. So that was an important piece. Mr. Wagamuth, I heard your point about number 5, back to age appropriate, connecting back to another policy, which we'll get to. Any questions on that section?
Mr. Romersky, the only suggestion I would make is define what we mean by technology tools. Are you talking about an app? Are you talking about like an online article? Like, what is a quote technology tool? What does that mean?
Yeah, Mr. Paul, do you want to tackle and address kind of from your perspective the technology tool side?
Sure, I would define that more as.
Mr. Paul, can you speak up a bit, please?
The microphone, he's not hearing you.
My apologies for that. I would definitely define that as an app as well as a website tool, software that we would be using as well. So it would encompass all those.
Okay, it might just be helpful to include that in the definition section.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Keener.
Thank you.
And then the challenge section, this is comparable to something we will see in the next policy with regards to if a parent or guardian individual from a community standpoint wants to challenge something, that we do have an objective process. We do currently have a formal process for that. That information is available to all members of the public through our website. We reference it in a variety of ways, providing parents that information up front. Anything that is being challenged kind of gets put on hold. It's still available until that reconsideration process has been completed. And then we obviously will go back, look at that process. I think it's important to make sure that we are going back and reviewing that process as we are doing with curriculum, et cetera, in that any matters, whether it's the superintendent or designee, if something is challenged, there is someone overseeing that entire process. And then there's notification to the board of any recommendation for the removal of material caused by parental concerns. So we keep the board updated as well.
Again, just so it doesn't get lost, the review of the challenge material shall be handled objectively, period, is my suggestion. I realize I'm one of 9, but I want to make sure that doesn't get lost because that also applies under challenge materials under policy 109.
Correct.
For one, I actually like the language as is, because I think that it's difficult to have an objective review without accompanying standards. And I think that one of the standards that we've used quite successfully is looking at context versus the work as a whole. And I think, the challenge process that I was involved with, having that standard and having that anchor was very helpful. So I actually like that language because I think it helps to focus the review and make sure that we're looking at this objectively. It actually is in furtherance, Mr. Wolgemuth, of your goal of objective review. What exactly does objective mean? And that is one standard of objectivity. So I would be in favor of that language.
I actually support the revision that Mr. Wolgemuth put in there. I think in theory, what you're saying is terrific. However, I think we've run into numerous occasions now where the segment taken out of context is absurd enough that the book still should be considered to go through the review process. By changing it to the language that Mr. Wolgemuth puts in there, it's still going to be handled objectively. We're just not burdening it with some red tape saying, well, we're not going to review the book because it has 3 sentences that are terrible.
And I would just highlight the fact that a lot of young men and women are not able to look at a section of a book in totality of the meaning of the whole book. And hopefully that makes sense. You only begin to do that as you age and as you grow and as you mature. And I would suggest that depending on the age of the child reading the book, that a section that might be considered part of a good book as a whole, that section, which could be graphic in nature in some way, it's hard for young men and women to discern that in that moment. And they just take that in the context that it is. So I would suggest that it is something that is a concern to me, and that we don't just, we don't need to include that in an objective review.
Well, I would say, and I think that I think most of us agree on the notion of age appropriateness. And certainly, I think having an age appropriateness as a standard is appropriate. I mean, so I think to the extent that that's your concern, Mr. Wolgemuth, I agree with you. But I'm very concerned that people will cherry pick isolated passages and use them as an excuse to challenge a work that is in its whole has significant educational value.
I do think from a challenge process standpoint, being that there are specific procedures from a committee standpoint, all of that will be able to be reviewed. So regardless of where the language falls, we do have a formalized process if someone is not pleased or has significant concerns. And then that group that's reviewing that material does then review everything, looks at the concern that was provided by the individual who wants to challenge it, looks specifically at the concern that they note. I mean, it's not something where someone can just say, I don't like this book, I want it challenged. I mean, there is a formal process. It starts with contacting the principal. then specific forms are provided. That parent, guardian, or community member must provide full detail, rationale, explanation. And then it goes into, a whole process from there, and there's appeals all the way through that process, up to at the end, something coming to the board. So again, I appreciate the feedback. We'll go back and look at that. But as we move forward, I think it's regardless of the language, wherever we land on that, I want to be clear, there is a formal objective process that needs to occur when there is a challenged material. And we have that, and we have utilized it. We will continue to look at that process and evaluate it to determine if we need to make any changes with that, especially as we're looking at some new policies here. But you can see from a policy standpoint, given that from something new, the complexity and difficulty of trying to figure out how do you stay from a policy standpoint at that high level without getting into that granular detail that would be in more of the procedures, administrative regulations, et cetera. And why this was not an easy task, and it has taken some time to try and figure out where to go with pulling all these together.
I believe Mr. Mallon, do you have a comment?
I'll withhold my comment till later.
Mr. Mallon, I'm sorry, I did not hear your remark.
I'll withhold my comment to a later section. And hopefully that point will come again.
Okay.
Okay, so moving then to after textbooks and review of instructional materials and stuff, materials provided by educators, we then have policy 109, which used to be resource materials, that I'd recommend we replace that title as school library materials, because we do need and understand that there is a difference between the textbooks and resource materials versus library materials for students. School library materials obviously need to enrich, support, and assist in implementing the educational program of the school. From a purpose standpoint, we thought it was important to include that school libraries are places for voluntary inquiry. We look at the materials, and I think we have to look at them differently than the instructional materials. We recognize that the school library materials do need to support the program, and we need a wide range of materials that are age and grade appropriate, have varying levels of difficulty, and represent different points of view. And the purpose of this policy then would be to guide the selection, challenge, and maintenance of the library materials. As we looked at this from a purpose standpoint, then we felt it was important, because we have said that the materials should consist of a wide range of materials that are age and grade appropriate, varying levels of difficulty, and represent different points of view, to try and define that. As we were working through this process of trying to define it, one of the pieces that is that was very evident to all of us is from a definition standpoint, whether it's a definition of the type of material or what should or shouldn't be in play. If the definition is not solid, clear cut, 100%, two people can pick up a material, read the definition, and say it should be X, Y, or Z. Those individuals should be able to say it's X, Y, or Z. It shouldn't come down to kind of that interpretation. Otherwise, what happens is, which is what happens regularly in education, you have human selection. You have that human component where you are now trying to interpret something. Does it meet this? Does it not meet this? And then we have parents, community members, board members looking at it. I think this, or I think this. And that's where it gets a little difficult. So again, this is a starting point, but as we define school library materials, we're saying nonfiction, fiction books, periodicals, reference books, multimedia and digital materials, and instructional material that could be used to supplement things in our classes. That was easy. Age and grade appropriate. We are talking about things that are suitable for the age it is intended for, based on, as we were looking at this, trying to understand how things are selected, based on publishers' evaluation of material and multiple reviews from professional organizations. While we do have specific things in place that we do, as I was engaging in discussion, I was reminded that those are really specific and should be more in administrative regulations. We can certainly engage in the discussions around the age and grade appropriate. If I can just finish these other two real quick, and then I'll open that section up for discussion. The varying levels of difficulty, meaning that our collections needs to contain material with similar content on various reading levels. Or at least we need to be able to obtain those materials if needed so that all students within the building can access information. We know that students read at different levels, and so we need to make sure that we have that varying level of ability. And finally, representing different points of view, meaning library materials will represent viewpoints of multiple cultures, religions, organizations, political groups, and or ideologies. I will stop there.
Under age, grade, appropriate shall mean, it's a little confusing the way that part of the policy is worded when it gets into the age is intended for, and it will not meet definitions outlined in the state or federal laws for inappropriate content such as pornography and obscenities. There's like a double negative there. It doesn't make sense. So I just think we need to reword that
You have
section.
Updated.
Oh, I'm looking at an old version then.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if,
All right.
so what you see up on the screen and in your packet,
Where I have my notes.
is an updated version. So what we're looking at is to make sure it's suitable for the age it's intended for. I will hit further down when we talk about some regulations. Things were moved around as people reviewed material and gave me additional feedback. Any other questions in terms of the definitions that you see either in your packet or up on the screen?
No, my only suggestion is, and I'm not gonna share all the detail and all my notes. I'll get those to you at another time, but that we at some way, shape, or form make an attempt to define what we would call sexually explicit material, which under the federal law, we're required to protect children from. And so I think as a school board, we have the liberty to create a definition around the subjective matter and put some guidelines in place. And I have some suggestions for that, but without, usurping the time, I'll hold those and I'll be happy to share those later.
Any other comments on the definition section? Under delegation of responsibility.
I do have one. I'm thinking suitable for the age it was intended for. Are we saying we only want books that are for the age of our students, which are typically 18 and under? I know that some books are actually labeled adult and have content in there that probably is not appropriate, in my opinion, to be in a school shelf. And the librarians have lots of choices about what to purchase. But there are some books that are labeled adult that some of our AP students, some of our kids who love to read, love to explore, that they would be appropriate. So we'd have to look at content. So I don't know if that affects the wording of this or not.
I can certainly follow up with our library coordinator on that from a content or an age standpoint. I believe, and from a reference standpoint here, anything that would be AP would be connected back to a classroom instructional standpoint. So that
But it would be in the library though. It wouldn't necessarily be in the classroom.
if there's supplemental material, it's possible. In that particular piece, suitable for the age it's intended, if a student's taking an AP course, then the student taking that course at that age in which we're offering it, that material would be appropriate. They've elected to take that class. They're aware of the content. I'm thinking about, we have a college and the high school class right now that was approved from the University of Pittsburgh. It's a film course. And so what we've done with that is worked with families and made them aware of the parents or guardians of the content. They've signed off, they've approved. And so that permission then gives us access for that
Access to
student.
do that.
But I'll go back and double check that. I think a lot of the pieces that from a library standpoint, and I'm just trying to pull up one piece here. We'll follow up because we do have students turning 18 are considered legal adults. And so that's a piece from a library standpoint, but knowing that we do span, and as an educational institution, we do serve students up through age 21, depending on programming. So there are some things we do have to be mindful of when looking at that.
Right.
But I would certainly get clarification on that.
And certainly some books that are labeled for adults are appropriate for high school students to read. I mean, I read them when I was in high school.
Right. I think a lot of times too with as we learned through our session too, When you have publishers evaluation, so when someone writes a book, publishers then evaluate that book and, determine age, classification, et cetera. And then it gets also reviewed multiple times by other entities. And so from a selection process, that's what our librarians are using. They're using multiple tools and they're professional tools, not just personal opinions, to determine whether something should be selected or not.
And I looked at that list. I went to a lot of those lists and looked when I was reviewing different things. Some of them are very heavy, leaning one way with one opinions. And I found that somewhat disturbing but that there wasn't a counterbalance in the list for review.
Okay.
The main one that they use typically is fairly balanced, but when new books come out, those are usually pretty focused on certain topics. It seemed like, and because what's popular in what we read, there's cycles for it, is like maybe fantasy books or books about different. So that's what those are the new books that come out. So that's what the journals are reviewing. So I just would want balance in that. And then some of the books, as has been noted at different times, you get it and you think it's going to be okay. And then you get it and it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know about this. So, but just also to remind the librarians, they're not banning books. They're choosing what books are coming to be on our shelves. And while we may not like everything, that doesn't mean that they can't still be on our shelves, depending on the content.
Right. One of the pieces from a delegation of responsibility is delegating the authority to select resources by our professionally trained and certified staff, subject to the approval of the superintendent or designee, which is our current process. That's what we do. They recommend, and then their orders are put in, and then it goes through, approval process from a purchasing standpoint. I did add in here just a piece similar to the previous policy around making sure that the funds that we're using are distributed equitably throughout the district, and that we stay within the budgeted allotments unless a recommendation is made to the board to utilize unbudgeted funds for specific books. Just a little more clarity, we do have written procedures for the selection materials, so I just emphasize that. And then obviously we have the ability to have individuals view what's available, and parents can access as members of our community through Destiny to see what is available to students. The next section, when you get to the guidelines, we just kind of cleared all of those out, moved down to selection of materials. So Mr. Paul, if you can scroll down there. Obviously, again, kind of reiterating, we want a variety of materials, age and grade appropriate, varying levels of difficulty. Professional tools are used to guide the librarians in their selection process. And any material that meets state or federal regulations for definitions of pornography and obscenities will not be included in our collections. I know that was some questions that came up as we looked at the legal statutes around this particular topic. Again, conversations through the DA's office, through our own solicitor, others, and making sure we're fully aware of that. Obviously, anything meeting those definitions would not be included. And then providing that annual notice for parents of how they can access our library, how they can limit certain titles in our material, and how things can be challenged, which we've done multiple times in a variety of ways. And finally, just recently, our final way of everybody taking the paper home. I have the challenge material part. Mr. Wagemuth, Mr. Keener, I hear both of you based on your previous comments. We will certainly be able to go back and look at that and come forward with, when we bring this for first read. Obviously, the challenge process is similar to what was in the previous policy, making sure that it is objective and making sure that we have procedures in place. Anything that is being challenged stays in place until a decision is made. So it's the exact same language. Again, we'll revisit the comments that were provided. Then we added the piece around the maintenance of the school library collection. It is important to know that our librarians not only spend a lot of time on the selection, but also the maintaining. And they need time to be able to go through to determine if books should should remain. That is not a personal decision. What they are using is a lot of our professional tools to determine if that book should that book still be part of your collection? Should it be a main part of your collection, a supplementary part? They go through and they look at all of that. They have specific written procedures. Obviously, our libraries are huge, and as you saw through our informational session, well over hundreds, thousands of books available to our students. And so they can't get through all of that. So they break it up into sections, kind of like our curriculum audit revision process cycle. So they are doing that on an annual basis. And so we just wanted to outline in policy kind of the broader sense of what is done there. So that would be policy 109.
Mr. Robisky, can you emphasize, you know what I'm talking about now, right?
Yes. So you had asked Mr. Bard about the tags. So when books come into our collection, we utilize Destiny as our platform. And when parents click on a book, you can then see specific content that is available. And I just want to be able to reference the correct words because I was so focused more on the policy. So I want to make sure I'm saying this correctly. So when you click on a book, you get a pop-up kind of on the side if you're in Destiny, and it gives you a little bit about the book. It gives you an overview, and you can click more details. And when you click on more details and scroll down, you see what's called related subjects. Those related subjects in the rectangular boxes with rounded edges are known as the tags. Those tags that are with a book specifically come from the publishers, come from the evaluation tools, and then Destiny imports those. As we have been working through this process, while we could certainly kind of clear up or clarify, if something is not clear with regards to a tag, we need to make sure that we are still adhering back to, from a publisher standpoint, that we're not shifting the focus of a specific book. But we do have the ability to go back and look at that and make sure we're providing clarity, any adjustments if that is warranted, if something is not clear from a specific book in which the publisher or all the evaluation tools have provided. So that is a piece there that our librarians work through. And for, if I can just add one more piece, in terms of the limitations that a parent or guardian could impose on a student, I do want to be clear with everyone who is still listening, even though it's in the letter. If something is submitted, our library coordinator, and in her absence, other librarians are following up with a personal conversation with every parent or guardian to make sure they understand and can clarify for the parent what it means when they say a specific topic. So for example, if they're saying violence and they don't want their child to have access to books that include violence, they're talking through trying to understand from the parent or guardian, what does that mean to you? So then they in turn can help kind of direct that parent to say, okay, here's what it means in terms of the tags we have access to or other topics that they might not be thinking about. So we engage in that discussion from a clarity standpoint. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that they explained to us, because I've heard a lot of chatter out and about that, oh, Destiny doesn't show this book has this, and it does. They're not exclusively using Destiny to find the tags.
Right. They are looking at multiple platforms. And in fact, in the procedures of reviewing, if there is a limitation, there are, I want to say 4 to 5 to 6. I can hear Mrs. DeMaria kind of shouting it out right now if she's listening. We'll get that clarification to you, but I know she explained, like, there are multiple platforms that they go to determine if that book contains any of the content that is being requested from a limitation standpoint. It is not just a quick, I check in Destiny and I'm done, to your point. It is very detailed and thorough. But again, that personal conversation with the parent is really the critical first step to understand what the parent meant. Any other questions on policy 109?
Yes, I have some questions and comments. I
Sure.
think Mrs. Johnson's point was.
Mr. Mallow, I'm sorry, could you speak into the microphone, speak up a little bit, please?
I was Mr. Keener. Mrs. Johnson made an excellent point that just because she doesn't agree with a particular book doesn't mean that it shouldn't be in our collection, as well as anyone else involved in the process, including members of our public. And I would remind this board and the public that it is illegal for our librarians and for this board to ban books from our libraries. It's easy by omitting certain words such as weighing the value of the material as a whole and not on passages or segments considered out of content to be removed and therefore not convey the context with which our professionals make these decisions. It's also evident to me from discussions that I've observed this evening and in other formats that there appears to be consternation amongst specific board members here that they do not accept and represent the professionalism of our librarians. And I've also heard similar context and comments from the public. Our librarians have been schooled, they are educated. Their obligation is to provide materials that are useful to most anyone. I may disagree with certain materials that are in the library. Anyone else may disagree with them. But to Mrs. Johnson's point, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be on the shelf and utilized. It is not up to any given individual, or as a matter of course, this entire board, to restrict books based on other than objective reasons. And that includes your personal and religious reasons. We are here to be objective and to provide a balanced, open perspective on all materials that are available to our children and even our teachers, using our library as a reference. So I think it's extremely important to keep that language of weighing the value of all materials as a whole and not looking at specific passages like was brought to our attention this evening in an attempt to say this is inappropriate and doesn't belong on our shelves. I'm not saying I agree with the assertion that that item that was presented should be on our shelves, but the material with which this stuff is written has to be weighed on the basis of the whole. And we have to respect the value and professionalism of our librarians by this board and the public continuing to essentially attack our librarians. And it's happened within the public. It's happened somewhat within our community. You tend to vilify librarians. It's causing us to lose talent and capabilities. And it's not allowing, the board is not accepting the delegation of responsibility to those trained individuals. So I would respectfully submit that we be careful in how we continue down this path.
Mr. Mallon, I would agree with what you say. Although I hope I've never disrespected. Have I challenged the librarians? Yes. Have I asked a lot of questions? Yes. I know what they had to go through to get that degree and all of their certifications. And I know how much hours it takes, and many hours, and some of you do, because you've done some of the same sort of research that our librarians do, that I also have done as well. The librarians are our gatekeepers, in that they are the ones who go through the list and pick. They don't ban, they pick, they curate. Are they flawless? No. Do I challenge their professionalism? No. Do I like some of the things they do or don't do? Well, I don't even like everything my husband does. So, you know, that's the way it goes. So, but there's a mutual respect there, and I actually do trust them. Someone said recently, trust and verify, and I think that's what we're trying to do. Do we want pornography and obscenities that are illegal on our shelves? No, we don't. Do we want to say that kids who are who want to explore different things about their identities, that we're going to limit those books? No, but there are thousands of books out there that help our children explore that. And some of them are very uncomfortable for us to read. But there's really not anything wrong with it, except we're uncomfortable and we don't want our child to read that.
And maybe because you or I are uncomfortable, doesn't mean that we should preclude another teacher or student from reading that same material, because under certain circumstances, it may very well be helpful and appropriate to what's happening in that individual's circumstance.
And I would agree with that, with the exception of, and I don't know what those legal definitions are, pornography and obscenities. And there are some books that we've looked at that it's like, this is just not written very well, but there's like 5 others that are written very well that cover the same sort of topics. So we're also asking, we're saying objective, but we're also saying there's a value judgment there about which book is going to best serve our children.
I agree.
Which book is going to best contribute to their knowledge, their education, to help them through their, the how to get through 13-year-old, your life through being a 13-year-old girl, things like that. So we're asking an awful lot of our librarians.
That's why I think it makes it easier if we work on as a board on doing what our job is, and that is to set guide rails and policies around these type of items. That is our role as a board. It has nothing to do with professionalism. I live and die by policies. So do the rest of the professionals in this room. And so I have no concern with working around setting policy and guide rails to define some of the things that I would see as subjective as it relates to some of the federal and state regulations. And that is within our role as a board. And it does help our librarians know that these are the bumpers on the road. There's a lot of latitude if you liken it to bowling, and I'm not a big bowler, and I used to need bumpers. Those bumpers are there to make sure that you don't fall into the gutter, and the board is designed to set bumpers, and those bumpers are our policies. And it has nothing to do with disrespecting professionals or not. I live and die by policies every day. And so in a professional world, I'm not offended by policies. They're there to create guidelines.
But
I think if,
our policies as they're written should be in fact bumpers and not be overly restrictive. That's all I'm talking about.
I don't disagree, and I think that's the direction we're trying to head with these policies.
Mr. Keener?
yeah, Mrs. Johnson, to your point about the definition, and I hear this a lot, and I think I don't want to sort of turn this into like a big discussion about statutes and whatnot, but when people say what is pornography and what is not pornography, it's not the subject matter, it's what the intention of the work is. If a work, whether it be a book, a movie, a magazine article, whatever, if the primary purpose of it is to incite sexual desire and sexual passion, then it's pornography. If the primary purpose of the work is something else, even if some part of the book includes content that addresses sexual themes, but the purpose of the book is not to incite sexual desire or sexual passion, then it's not pornography. So that's just a sort of a quick, easy way of separating the two.
There are many books that I would say that have, and I'm not even getting into that. We will, I think what we're doing now is just really sorting through, bringing forth, trying to bring everything out and set those bumpers to help our librarians who are indeed the gatekeepers of what goes on the shelves of our book, of our libraries. And I'm no lawyer, but this line that's in here, material that meets the state and federal legal requirements, et cetera, that's why we have a solicitor to go through and review that. And then we have procedures and I guess regulations that we practice that are the result of the policy, what do we need to do to implement the policy? And we all know that process, and it happens here in schools as well as in the outside world. So we can depend on our solicitors to go through and advise us on all of this. And the reason I was saying that about the librarians, I just want to make it clear. These librarians, they say they're professionals. They are. Do they care about our kids? Absolutely. Do we butt heads? Yes, we do. But their bottom goal is the same goal as our goal is the same as every parent, to do the best for our children. And I just want to say that so we remember that as we go through this stressful process, and it is stressful for some of us, to determine what's okay to approve and what's not okay to approve. Because we're not looking to villainize our librarians. No way at all. So, anything else? Okay, I'm sorry. Now, go ahead.
So
Finish.
thank you for the discussion and feedback. I do want to just say these 5 policies, we will go back, continue to make some of those changes. We will start to see them coming forward once they're ready as first reads at future policy meetings for more discussion. And obviously first read, second read, and then formal approval. So you'll see these again before they actually get to the board agendas in the formality side. And the last piece that, and while I know this has taken some time, I will say huge thank you to all of our administrators who work on policies regularly. This is not something that is easy to do. Having 5 running simultaneously, it just gives me a greater appreciation for all of the work that our administrators who get charged with these to work on and bring forward to you as a board on a regular basis. I do want to thank all of you, and those who aren't here, just publicly thank you, because this is a lot of time, energy, and effort to not only dig into the legal piece, but to bring something like policies forward with regards to changes, recommendations, et cetera. So I do appreciate the patience as we work through these. We will start to see these moving forward in future meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything to say about this tonight? Okay, next fund policy to discuss, or point of the agenda, is locker room protocols.
So
I don't think we actually have a policy to look
There's
at
no
here.
policy.
We're just, this is just discussion.
Mr.
I'm
Keener,
reading-
correct.
turn to you.
Okay, I'm so sorry. What?
It's Mr.
Would
Keener.
it- you want me to go, Mr. Bomerski?
Did you have something with regards to this specific
I'm
topic?
sorry, I overstepped. That what we were talking about was so much education. It's all blending together. Listen, I want to go home too. My daughter's leaving.
Mr. Keener, go ahead.
Leaving away.
So in my role as chair of the Policy Personnel Legal Committee, following our brief discussion and Mr. Bomerski's update on Tuesday, I asked that this be added just so that we can, on a high level, talk about next steps in the locker room protocol question. I know that people have different feelings. Some folks would like to see engage in a policy development process. Others would like to talk about administrative decisions related to locker room usage. But just so that we can keep this discussion in the sunshine and determine next steps, I thought it would be helpful to add this on. So I asked that this be added, just so that we have a clear sense of what the board's desire is for next steps in the locker room protocol discussion.
And as I shared on Tuesday night, if I can just jump in here real quick, Mr. Keener, from ensuring privacy for all students is a priority for us from an administrative standpoint. So I would like to be able to make sure that is accomplished. Dr. Musser and I were back over at middle schools today, over at LMS with our Director of Buildings and Grounds and Maintenance Supervisor, continuing to get updates, working through some additional pieces. So I do expect that to be moving very quickly as they are putting those final details on what we need to be able to procure, because as I shared, the first piece did not work as we had planned. So we had to go back to the drawing board. We are doing that. I do expect that to move as quick as we can. And if there is discussion around, the need for any type of specific protocols or questions that you have, we can certainly answer those. But I would like to be able to accomplish the privacy piece as a first step.
I think that's a good first step, but I also concur that we need to take it maybe a step further. We've been talking about this for many, many months now. And I think we really need to look as a board at considering some type of policy that helps, again, provide some guidelines and guardrails around this situation. So I applaud you for the work that you're doing to try to correct the situation in the moment and the reactiveness. But I still think there's a step that we need to take that goes beyond that. So that would be my only comment tonight.
Mr. Berners, do we have a time frame on which? Or
Mr. Mauer, maybe, I'm sorry, I think Mr. Mauer's microphone might not be turned up as loudly as the others because it's still difficult to hear him.
because I don't feel like shouting at you this evening, Grant. Mr. Berners,
Yes.
my question is that better, Grant? He's ignoring me.
Mr. Mauer, your question in terms of a timeline, I am hopeful to be able to provide an additional update to the board, if not tomorrow, based on our discussion today, by next Friday at the latest, when we can expect the next shipment and then of the materials that we have ordered and want to continue ordering, and then the timeline for the maintenance team to get it completed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You know, I would just add that it seems to the outside world that we've been dragging our feet.
Yeah.
And we, to some extent, probably didn't expedite as fast as we could. And the one solution we tried didn't work.
Correct. And I will say, full disclosure, it's the structure of the buildings and the layout of the locker rooms themselves. And so when you look at trying to create and install private changing areas in a space that was never designed for that, you are working around ductwork, you're working around lighting, electrical, drop ceiling panels, which you cannot suspend heavy things from. Like, there's a lot of work that goes into trying to figure out how to do this. And the last thing we want to do is to put something up only to inadvertently have it come right crashing down. So it needs to be done. I understand the need and desire and want it done ASAP from a privacy standpoint, but I also need to make sure it's safe.
Thank you for that explanation. That's specifically why I asked. So
And I will say things that I suggested, I thought would work, but I am not an engineer, and if I were to do it, it would come crashing down. So.
Thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
I just wanted to add that I concur with Mr. Wogelmuth, that I think we need to work on policy in this area.
My only, I guess I'm agnostic about whether this should be done through policy. My pragmatic concern is that right now our students are not able to change and nor if they wish shower after gym class. That's probably okay in the winter, but we're moving into warmer months. People are going to be running, they're going to be outside, and they're not going to be able to do the normal things that people do at the gym so that they're hygienic for the rest of the day. If we go through a full policy development process, nothing is going to get resolved this school year. Just looking at the realistic time frame of policy development. So I want people to understand that if the board is okay with that, then that's fine. But I don't think it's realistic to think that we can develop policies in the next month.
And if I can just clarify, having been in there again today, the showers that are in our locker rooms at our middle schools and high schools are not used by our students from an athletic standpoint. If students want to shower after competing, they have that ability. However, in the middle schools, I'm not going to address the other pieces. We are utilizing the open space to kind of the typical gang shower type facilities to create those private changing areas. Therefore, students will not be, and they currently do not and have not, to my knowledge, ever since I've been in the district, showered after middle school PE. But we are utilizing that space because it is an open space to be able to construct those private areas. Just to be clear, so everyone knows.
Couple things, comments on research I've done with athletes in our school concerning the showers being used or not being used. I can't know if this is true. I'm just going based off what the athletes have told me. Number one, If you turn on the showers and leave them on, they never get hot water. So that would be a question for Ms. James, if that's accurate. I'm being told only cold water runs out of the showers. So anybody who ever attempted to use the shower was not going to use the shower. Number two, if we did have dividers in those showers, yes, they would use the showers. And that's from a majority of the athletes I've spoken to.
One is at high school level.
I'm sorry, that is at the high school level, not junior high.
Then Mr. Bobrovsky, previously, board was informed that at the junior highs, we were using those shower areas for
Storage, correct.
So
And
it wouldn't even have been
correct,
available.
correct. And what we are constructing and putting together will not permit them to shower because of the fabric and, you know, rods and rails and all that kind of stuff.
Also, to be descriptive, Mr. Mauer, this was in regards to athletic competition. It was in regards to PE.
Oh, I get it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And break.
Ready to move on then?
That would conclude the policy portion of the meeting. Is the board, we would move into the education and program section next, in which we have three presentations. Does the
Correct.
board want a break, given that we've been going 2 hours?
Keep rolling.
We're going to take a.
I think some need a break here.
Yes.
So we will take that short break. And is it okay if we can convene at 7:05 by 7:15?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, 7:15.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Roberski.
This meeting is being recorded.
Please, Mr. Alban, don't misunderstand me. I'm not criticizing how we sent out the questionnaire.
Sure.
But at some point, we're gonna be voting on an expense. And some people are for it and some people are against it. And when they're looking at the proof and they see only 16 or 18% of parents gave feedback, their question is gonna be, I never even knew about it. You know, I understand that they were given every opportunity, but that's where we're at right now. And I do appreciate tremendously the excitement that the teachers that are teaching it provided in January, and Ms. Fitzgerald tonight spending 3.5 hours here so she could tell us how good it is. That's extremely important and should be the most important. And Mr. Donato, to your point, I would have been that kid probably in third through sixth grade that said, I don't want that program. That's insane. It's too hard. I struggled. So I get all those things. I just wish that like the students, we had a bigger sample size.
No, this child she wasn't saying it negatively. She said it's hard, but I'm learning. She was saying it positively.
Okay, well, I would
like the program.
I would have been the one that didn't like it.
Didn't like it. And the other third, I would probably agree with going with the parents, maybe to see if you get a better result, but for the kids, I think if you try tracking these kids down and forcing them to do it, you're just going to get, I'm going to fill this out as fast as I can at this point. I would think the 58, 77% probably took some time to do it. And again, teaching fifth graders, not all of them probably even with the 77%.
To that point, two possible explanations. One, with the students, there's some logistics at play here, whether students are absent, whether they're out of the class for orchestra or for an intervention or something like that, that probably contributed to the not 100%. From the parent side, I think one of the explanations also may be just survey fatigue in our culture right now. I mean, you get surveyed for everything, walking out of a bathroom, was this a pleasurable experience or not? There are people who will just ignore surveys no matter what or how many times you ask them to take it just because of that. I do think it's important for us to determine and to follow up, as was asked, to make sure that wasn't indifference, because I think that would be a concern if it's just, I'm not going to say anything because I don't feel it was better and I don't have anything to contribute to the conversation. So I think some of those follow-up conversations are ones that we can bring back in April.
Are there any more parent teacher conferences coming up?
No. One thing I'll say just to close things out.
Mr. Keener has.
Sorry, Mr. Keener.
So I think the discussion, I think the survey results or the lack thereof are helpful data points. I'm actually very glad to hear that the students consider the curriculum to be rigorous. I think that's critically important that any curriculum that we have maintain and advance Hempfield's historic reputation for academic rigor. And so that to me is a positive. What I keep coming back to though is earlier in the presentation, and again, I thank you for the candor, is you basically said the thing doesn't move the needle in any measurable way. And when we started talking about this a year ago, the board, and I believe it was Mr. Donato, said about we need to see, will this work? Are there measurable outcomes to these curricula? And thank you. I'm grateful that those instructions were taken to heart and that we did measure the pilots against standardized test performance and against the control group. But at the end of the day, it's coming down to, we're going to be asked to spend north of $1 million on something that might not be moving the needle very much. And that's a high hurdle, at least for me.
I do also think that when you implement something, you won't likely see huge results necessarily within the 2 months from September to November or from September to January. So we do need to keep in mind too that our teachers were learning the program as they were starting, and working through that process. The other piece that I will say, again, the writing aspect of this, neither one of those assessments, Acadians or Exact Path, has any writing component to it. So some of the areas of our biggest need aren't actually measured by either of those assessments. And unfortunately, we won't have PSSA data to be able to know if those results are different.
And am I said north of $1 million. I got that from the preliminary budget where they have 1.55 million budgeted for this. Is that, understanding that it's not exact, is that a good ballpark figure? That how much will either curriculum cost?
1.55 was the more expensive of the two programs, and that is without any ESSER funds being used. So with ESSER funds being used, the cost will definitely be below $1 million.
Well, but the ESSER funds, that's still real money. I mean, I don't accept the argument that ESSER, I mean, because remember, ESSER funds are fungible to some degree. So if we use them here, we can't use them somewhere else. So I appreciate that argument. It's creative. I commend you for making it, but it's still $1 million to $1.5 million.
We'll be bringing all those financials to you at April 11th at that presentation. You'll have all of it in front of you.
Okay, I'd like actually to have them, well, okay.
Just go over, you said at the beginning, I think I grasped this, but vertical and horizontal alignment in the curriculum. And I'll just, from my experience as a fifth grade teacher, working basically with reading workshop type things. The unfortunate thing is you could tell when the kids came in, and again, this is not definitely the district I was in is not as large as Hempfield, but you could tell which kids had which instruction, you know, in math, in reading from the previous year, from the thing. And it's part of what she mentioned. As she said, she had kids not going to her building that, oh, this is great. I wish I would have thought of this. You know, and I did say, I mean, I would love to have seen one of those things jump out. And I did say that, but I also think what she's mentioning and things to have to go through, create your own things is really not a good way for our teachers to spend their time.
Correct. And so the horizontal piece of that is what Mrs. Fitzgerald was referring to. Like she has 4 fourth grade teachers in her building and every single one of them was doing something different. So when those kids went to fifth grade, yes, they were learning the same skills, but they were doing it in 4 different ways. When they went to fifth grade, you mix those kids up and now you have 4 different classrooms in fifth grade where there's no consistency. The other piece that I have seen going across the district is I will see the same activity being done in second grade, third grade, and fourth grade, because in ELA, you're teaching the same main skills, you're just increasing the level of complexity. But I would go from one second grade classroom and see an activity on main idea in detail and go to third grade and see them doing the same thing. So imagine your frustration if you're a teacher. You've spent a half hour trying to find something, you find a great activity only to take it out and for a third of your kids to say, oh, we did this last year. So that's what a program that creates consistency will allow us to avoid.
And that's one of the things with the math program. I mean, you can carry this on to math and it is consistent. Are we going to see, I think I had this conversation with Dr. Danbridge in one of our visits. Are we going to see immediate improvement? No, for the exact same reasons. The kids haven't experienced it, but they are. I mean, I think one of the times that Dr. Danbridge and I, we saw something and we were math teachers and it was like, wow, this is presented in a way that, because it's been a long time since we were teaching math, that, oh yeah, you could do it this way, but we honestly would have never thought about it. It was an interesting and a great way for the kids to learn the material.
I will say, regardless of where we land, I know there's still some more work to do. First and foremost, all of our pilot teachers deserve to be commended for all of the time, energy, and effort that they put in from a volunteer standpoint. The desire to want to do this requires a tremendous amount of extra work, not only this year, but last year through the summer in preparation. And while I know we had others here and we were able to be out in their classrooms and see them, one of our pilot teachers is still here. I just personally want to thank you, Mrs. Fitzgerald. I've been in your classroom seeing phenomenal work. When you look at the feedback in terms of level of engagement, level of complexity, level of thinking, and I will say most impressively on two fronts here. You're always passionate about what you do and you care about your kid. You know that when you walk in your classroom and you feel it. I feel like this year, compared to being in your room in the past, there was that extra step and pep in your step this year. And I know we've talked a couple times about how rejuvenated you felt from a teaching standpoint because of what you've been able to do, not having to search for materials, rather focus your time and planning on how are you going to teach your students. It was truly evident in the classroom, and no matter what students that you were working with, they were thriving. But I also wanted to share a quick little story here. When I was in her room, there was a third grade teacher who was actually a pilot teacher for Savas in her room observing. And she had both pilot teachers here. The third grade teacher had students in Mrs. Gerald's class the prior year. And as I was talking with her, what are you seeing? What are you thinking? And she said, I can't believe what I'm hearing and seeing from the students in the room in terms of, and again, here's that other piece most impressively, how the students are verbally engaging with one another about the text, like critically engaging in conversation about the text. So again, regardless of where we land, major kudos to all the pilot teachers. You are here, so thank you for all of your work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That is, and looking at it from a strategic and long-term perspective, this has been a goal of the board for more than 12 years. To bring continuity across learning in all aspects of our education across our different schools, because we had different learning approaches, different material taught, material content that was assimilated, and it created challenges for us in middle school and high school. This is a big step towards accomplishing that continuity in the educational process that will ultimately, I believe, yield results. And to the points that were made, in a beta test, it's highly unlikely that you will see dramatic improvement immediately. The proof of the pudding comes from years of implementation. So there's a risk. And there's a risk in spending those dollars. Unfortunately, Grant can't hear me, so.
Yeah, one thing just to close things out, I'll say that as Mr. Romersky mentioned, I covered classes so that the pilot teachers could go visit each other and see the other programs. And so I've had the opportunity to teach both of the programs. And I can tell you that the kids are highly engaged. The best part of this is that in a first grade classroom, we were doing morning routine kind of things. We're getting ready to start ELA and telling the kids that we're ready to get out books and start reading, and they cheer. That is when you know that it's working. And so, we can look at all of this, and I understand that that's all very important. But when you're in the classroom and you see a bunch of 6-year-olds excited and cheering to get a book in their hands to start reading and writing, then you're successful. So.
I also want to say thank you for all the work you've done, because I know it's been a lot of work coordinating this. And also, when I first came on the board, that was one of the things that was talked about, equity and having the same thing taught in each school, and now drilling it down to the grade levels. That's got to be beneficial for our kids.
Definitely.
And for now, and then I kept thinking about when they get to the upper levels, and then when they're ready to graduate, it will really be beneficial for them. So thank you very much.
Sure.
And also to you, Fitzgerald, and all of your colleagues.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't know if you all can see my picture when I'm not talking, but I was nodding. I'm very grateful for everyone's efforts here, regardless of where we go on the final vote. It's clear that a lot of efforts gone into this, and the administration and the faculty are to both be commended for the significant effort, and got us real actionable data here, and that's helpful. Thank you.
So if there's nothing else from the board, All right, anyone else? Thank you so much. Nothing else. I was rushing because I think we're ready to go. Thank you very much for everything you've done tonight. Appreciate it. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
With us.